itself into domestic investigations, seizing election materials as they did in Georgia, and publicly calling for Republicans, again, to take over and nationalize voting in multiple states. When you put all of this together, it is clear that what happened in Fulton County is not about revisiting the past. It is about shaping the outcome of future elections. And quite honestly, dismantling the very guardrails that were put in place to keep them free and fair. This is why it cannot be brushed aside with carefully worded letters from Director Gabbard. She owes Congress, and more important, the American people, direct answers. So once again, I'm calling on the Director of National Intelligence to appear in person before the Senate Intelligence Committee to testify under oath about her role in this matter. She needs to explain why she believed it was appropriate to involve herself in a domestic criminal investigation, why she facilitated direct contact between the President and FBI agents on the ground, and what safeguards, if any, were put in place to protect against direct political interference. Now, we all know that Americans deserve free elections, safe from political intimidation. They deserve a justice system that operates independently. And they deserve accountability when those very safeguards are put at risk. As Vice Chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I'm going to use every tool I can to make sure that we get those answers. And before I take questions, I remember back a year ago at this time when people would often ask me when they were seeing the actions of the Trump administration, do you think we'll have free and fair elections in 26 or in 28? And my response at that point was, I think you're overreacting. I have deep concerns about the fairness of our elections in 26 and 28 right now. I have concerns about the elections in primaries in our country. I have concerns about the elections that may take place in Virginia in terms of a redistricting referendum. These kind of actions that have taken place over the last year, as we've seen the systemic dismantling of the very protections that were put in place by, again, the first Trump administration. If it doesn't scare the heck out of you, it should. And then, if you go back to the report, the Bipartisan Intelligence Committee investigation report into the 2016 interference, unanimously agreed to by including the Secretary of State and all of the members of the committee. It said one of the strongest protections we had about interference in our election system was the fact of our decentralization, that we have these elections carried out as laid out in the Constitution by states and localities. The idea that now Donald Trump wants to nationalize these elections and have one political party take over that process, this provides a huge danger to our country going forward and the safety and security of these elections. So I'll be happy to take your questions.
Senator, given the President's comments on the podcast and the events in Georgia, have you heard about this effort spreading to other states? Are you concerned?
I'm deeply concerned about it spreading to other states.
Have you heard?
I have not heard the President in an area where she's clearly been excluded from most of the recent national events, including Venezuela, Iran, situation with NATO and elsewhere. I have no other logical explanation until and unless she comes forward and testifies. Please.
Thank you, Senator. Just as someone who's much more familiar than most with the ins and outs of the role of Director of National Intelligence, should Tulsi Gabbard have the time to be doing election probes in Georgia? Is that not a very busy job?
Well, let me answer it two ways. First of all, the FBI that's been over a month late on getting out the Epstein files, were they taking people off of getting that information out to put them on this investigation that seems like it's a thinly veiled attempt to kind of appease the President? And no, the Director of National Intelligence under Biden, under Trump 1, under Obama, that's a full-time job plus. running off on her own, and it's been reported to me that the FBI was not aware she was coming. She's got this much extra time. Well, I don't know what she's doing in the job. And it goes back to, at least until I'm corrected, otherwise, the assumption, since she's not been involved in any of the briefs on Iran, on Venezuela, on the circumstance with Greenland and NATO, or any of the other national security concerns where our intelligence community plays a critical role, most of those have been briefed by the Secretary of State or by John Radcliffe. I'm not sure what she's doing. Please.
Yeah, you said, I think, that you have not received any notification from the DNI about detecting foreign interference in election infrastructure, which is required under the law to report within 14 days. Have you her office says you also received a copy of this whistleblower complaint that we've now heard about. Have you, and do you know if there's a connection between what she did in Georgia and this whistleblower?
Well, let me try to answer that in two ways. One, in terms of, I read the intelligence briefs on a regular basis, and I've got a full staff that follows this. If there had been something percolating about foreign influence in the 26 elections, I sure as hell should have seen it. And I've not seen it. And you're right. If it was there, she had an obligation to report it to us. And I would point out again, during Trump 1, during Biden, there were regular updates from the DNI and the whole law enforcement intelligence apparatus to make sure that we could reassure Americans that the elections were going to be safe. We've had none of that. If anything, we've had the exact opposite, is they've broken down all the institutions put in place. On the second question of the whistleblower, I'm going to see that complaint imminently.
So you haven't received it?
I have not received it. I have not received it, but I think it is literally today or tomorrow. But let's go back and look at this for a second. It took the Gang of 8 6 months of negotiation with the Director of National Intelligence to share that whistleblower complaint. This is in direct contradiction to what Gabbard testified during her confirmation hearings, that she would protect whistleblowers and share the information in a timely manner. It took 6 months of bipartisan pressure to get them to bring it forward. The notion of the Gang of 8 was created so that you could have this kind of communication in a completely secure manner. And I do not, again, I'll take a look at the complaint, but the idea that she held back for 6 months a bipartisan request from the Gang of 8 is one more example of somebody that's in way over her head in this job.
Russia, China, or Iran try to interfere in the elections this fall, and at this point, I mean, is your concern greater? What's your greater concern? Is it foreign interference, or is it domestic?
Well, let me try to. The National Intelligence report, or when we did worldwide threats last year, the document that comes out with that, still included, this was the Trump administration, their last major report on this, still included. We are concerned about, election threats from China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and potentially others. And with AI tools, the threats grow more complicated all the time. It makes what happened in 2016 look like child's play. But right now, I'm more concerned about domestic interference. I'm concerned about a president that hasn't read the Constitution. I'm concerned about efforts to intimidate voters, whether it be ICE roving patrols, or whether it be these kind of claims that are brought. I'm concerned about the fact that I think in many states I've seen upwards of 50% of the election officials, who are all nonpartisan, have quit or retired, mostly because of some of the threats, online threats and doxing that's taken place. So yeah, I'm very concerned about domestic interference as well as foreign interference. And the ability then for a foreign entity to amplify these divisions or spread lies, that is, that's much easier now. Remember in 2016, Russia had to create fake identities to say crazy stuff and then amplify it. You don't need to create fake identities now. You can simply promote some of the theories that come out of folks in this administration. Please.
A few questions. One, to clarify, what setting will the whistleblower complaint be made available in? Will that be briefed? Will that just be made available to the Gang of Eight?
I believe it is only at the Gang of Eight, and I don't know the setting yet. But we'll have information on that over the next 30 seconds.
Further detail on the extent of the DNI's involvement in this investigation, just what's been said publicly, or to what extent actually the IC is now involved in this investigation?
We had no indication. I'm not sure we've had any of the letters we've actually even written the DNI ever responded to over the last year. There may be one or two. So, but, I can tell you this much, that our contacts within the FBI said they were as surprised as anybody her showing up and skulking around. Go back to what I said. The DNI has no domestic criminal investigation responsibilities. Her job is to look at foreign interference in our elections. And this whole effort is the opposite of transparent. Here and here.
On that point exactly, there seems to be a wide discrepancy between what you're describing and what Director of National Health described in her letter with a mandate of foreign and domestic involvement in election security. Could you explain more for people who follow this very closely why it is that it's only foreign concerns that fall under?
It goes back to the laws that created the whole intelligence oversight structure. It goes back to the National Security Act that was passed after President Nixon. It goes back to entities that were at least connected with the intelligence community involved in this little breakout called Watergate. And there was the whole notion that we need to make clear that our intelligence operations are outward-looking, and America don't need to worry about those agencies looking at them. It's one of the components we go through regularly when we debate Section 702. It is the job of the FBI to look into that. And for her to show up, and the hypocrisy of her showing up, after this administration has done more to dismantle the election protections put in place, the FBI's Foreign Line Influence Center, the law that was passed, I believe in 2019, that created in the Office of Director of National Intelligence a Foreign Malign Influence Center. If you're concerned about election security, you would beef that up. You wouldn't dismantle it. The number of folks that have been let go from CISA, in terms of cybersecurity protections. They work again, the fact that the 2020 election came off cleanly because many of the things that were put in place obviously cost Chris Krebs his job when he was head of CISA and said this was a clean election, but everything since that time has validated that. This seems, again, about Donald Trump's obsession. He lost in Georgia. He lost in 2020. The fact that he can't get that out of his head, and whether he is directing this investigation, it sure as heck appears that shouldn't he have more to do than talking to the FBI agents who are on the front line of serving a search warrant?
On this effort to nationalize elections, have you heard anything to indicate that it would be appropriate for states to hand over voter rolls, and would that do anything to increase election?
It is. Not only would it not be appropriate, I believe it would be, to the extent almost of a constitutional violation. The Constitution is clear that elections are the gambit of the state and localities. And the irony here is that and this is the hypocrisy of the moment, there were many states, every one of them Republican-led, that were concerned about when CISA tried to help put better cybersecurity protections in, it was called the Albert system. States were concerned, all Republican-led, or localities Republican that say, oh my God, this would be letting the feds into our purview. So this is, again, you know, the Alice in Wonderland world where up is down and down is up. The idea that you've got a Republican president saying, no, trust the feds on all this election, it is both against the Constitution and it's against the position of every Republican elected official from 20 through, I'd even say 2025. We'll see. I'm not sure many of them have yet responded. I'll be anxious to see whether any of them said, oh, no, we want to turn it all over to the feds.
Yeah, on that note, traditionally, intel is one of the more bipartisan issues in this chamber. We know how often you work across the aisle and speak with your colleagues on the Republican side. Do they share your concerns?
So I think, you know, I've talked to Senator Cotton. We have a good working relationship. I think, you know, we are going to get Gabbard testify, I believe, within the next few weeks about the worldwide threats hearing, unless she pulls out the same way she was supposed to talk to the election officials last Friday and then abruptly pulled out. And, you know, I can assure you the history the Intelligence Committee had of working bipartisanly and to monitor election security is going to continue this year. Please.
Hi, sir. On the whistleblower complaint, do you have confidence in Inspector General Fox, who the Senate confirmed in October? He is supposed to be responsible for the process of delivering this complaint to Congress. Is that any concern that you have involved in that?
It greatly concerns me that it took 6 months of bipartisan pressure to get what I think was supposed to be, and Eric, help me on this, was supposed to be delivered within 14 days? How long is before a complaint is supposed to be delivered?
14 days to review, another 7 to deliver.
Okay. So whether it's 21 days, we'll give it a month. But it took 6 months of bipartisan pressure to get the document that we should have seen months ago.
What finally changed, or when did that change that you now know?
I got notified just over the last few days, whether that was tied to the fact that my Republican colleagues agreed as well that what was happening in Georgia was so outrageous that you can't have this stonewalling coming from the administration. I got no answer. I don't have a direct answer on that.
I wonder if you could, I know you've got huge questions about all of this, but if you could draw us through a scenario as to what her presence in Georgia, the president's comments yesterday about taking control of 15 states, his retweeting of foreign conspiracy theories last week, how you see this, how they might use all of that to affect the
Listen,
2026.
people have been talking, and this is where, again, a year ago I thought it was kind of just speculation, but the idea that the president could use some event that would be allowed to send in an insurrection act. The idea that the president might send some part of the federal government, like ICE, into patrol, and suddenly people are saying, well, we want to make sure that nobody undocumented shows up at any polling station. Again, pre-Minneapolis occupation, yeah, that didn't ring as true as it potentially rings true right now. And the notional idea that since the president is obsessed about the fact that he won't accept the fact that he lost in 2020, the notional idea that he will, ask his loyalists to do something inappropriate beyond the Constitution scares the heck out of me. And I think it scares the heck out of most Americans because we're seeing the constraints move aside. And I come again back to the fact that I've raised this, repeatedly over the last number of months. Why would you dismantle the FBI center that appropriately looked at all of domestic and foreign threats to our elections? Why would you undo the legally created entity within the ODNI on foreign malign influence?
Concerns that they could create some fictitious foreign threat to the election?
The administration that this might not tell the truth I don't find that shocking at all. Anybody else? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This will not be the last word we'll have on this topic. Thank you.